Okay, so this is Joseph Barone, Troop 466 Assistant Scoutmaster, also with the National Catholic Committee on Scouting. And I'm doing an interview with John Mosby Russell about his life in scouting. And John and I talked about doing you wanted to talk a little bit about Joe Ehrman, I believe the name is. And so, John, why don't you go ahead and tell me about this particular person, Joe, and your relationship with him in scouting.
Well, I thought we were going to talk about the ring and all of that.
We talked about the ring. We talked actually about the ring last week.
Oh, did we get the Knights of Dunamis involved?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Well, I know that in 1954, I guess it was, I drove across the country for the summer with Bob Moore, and I think that's when I first met Joe Ehrman.
Okay.
There were some other. I'm a little hazy on this. We had to get the Knights of Dunamis involved, and I'm not sure that we set this up quite right, and I apologize for that.
No problem. Just talk. Don't worry about it.
Well, I know that. I think I did tell you that I never expected to get Eagle, and I transferred to a different troop and so forth. And I was very active with Herb Tucker, the Scoutmaster, and I didn't get I was in college, Catholic University, the first year when I got Eagle. I was 19, I think, and so I was doing nothing but going to the university, commuting by day, and the weekends I was active with the Troop 56 as Assistant Scoutmaster and taking training courses, Scouter training courses with Mr. Tucker. I had the 2-volume edition of the Scoutmaster's Handbook, and I got originally I hadn't if I hadn't switched troops and got involved with Mr. Tucker. He was a wonderful Scoutmaster. I think I have already told you something about that, and that he, even in the summer camp, if there were boys that couldn't go in the troop, he had somebody meet with them in town. We went to Camp Roosevelt, and Camp Roosevelt in those days, that was Theodore Roosevelt. That's long gone, unfortunately. It was located between Breezy Point and North Beach, about 45 miles from Washington, much closer than the main camp is today. And I felt that I wanted to have, they wouldn't allow us, and I don't know whether this is national or local policy, they wouldn't allow us to be in a scout troop as at age 19 or 20, and in a venture, did they call them venture crews then?
I think they were explorer posts.
They had explorer posts, sea scouts, and about the time of World War II, they had air scouts as well.
Air scouts, yeah. Yes.
Yep. So, but they wouldn't allow us to belong in both units, and that's. I felt that I wanted to have some association with my peers, but I didn't want to leave Troop 56. That, after all, I would have never gotten Eagle, and I think I told you that Mr. Tucker gave me an Eagle Scout ring at the time, and that's how I was wearing it in my second year in Latin class. And I mentioned Frank Levine, did I, or to you already?
Yeah, yes, you did. Yes.
Okay. Well, so that's what I was doing, and so I wrote to the national office of the Boy Scouts of America was at 2 Park Avenue in those days, New York City. And I wrote to them. One of the amazing things is, I think, today, because everything we did then was by correspondence, and I had answers within a week. So I wrote to 2 Park Avenue, and they wrote me back. I mentioned the Knights of Dunamis because I saw it in the Scoutmaster's handbook. They also had the Order of the Arrow, and I know that. Well, I don't know whether I knew that at the time, but before I got into this stage in scouting, at Camp Roosevelt, they had the CMO, which was the Clan of the Mystic Oak. It was a local thing, and I think in World War II, as you know, most of the young adult leadership went into the service, the military, and apparently they had some problems. I mean, I didn't know much about that at the time as a boy, but that's why I guess nobody mentioned the Order of the Arrow to me, because that's what they would have today. Order of the Arrow is a very strong camping society, as you probably know, throughout scouting.
Yes.
But so when I mentioned the Knights of Dunamis, they didn't say anything about anything else, but they wrote me a letter and said, we don't encourage promotion of the Knights of Dunamis. But, and that's I tell lots of scouts when I've gone over this history, they didn't say I couldn't try. And they said if I wanted information, I could write to Mr. C.J. Carlson. And Mr. Carlson was the Region 12. I believe there were 12 regions in the country at that time. They're somewhat less now, as you may know. And the Region 12 was on the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, and California. And Mr. Carlson was the region director, but he was the Grand Patron General. And in the national organization of the Knights of Dunamis, there was only one adult leader. And he had been, he was, as I said, he was the region director at that time. The Knights of Dunamis had been organized by Raymond O. Hansen, who was in the San Francisco Council. And for many years, when I was involved with it, the council office in San Francisco, I forget the name of the lady. They had an elderly, reasonably on lady that had been with them for many years in the office, and she maintained all the Knights of Dunamis records and things like that. I met her a number of times later when I got more involved with the organization. And so Mr. Carlson put me in touch with the Grand Secretary. He was a young scouter, probably in his early 20s. I met him later, and he answered me very quickly. I never showed his letter because his spelling was very poor, but they had a printed manual of how you organize the chapter and the officers and so forth, and it was printed, and he sent it to me. And so there again, the National Capital Area Council, in which I was located here in Washington, D.C. area, was one of the larger councils. We have, I think, 23 districts now. I'm not quite sure how many we had then, but it was quite a number. And in the District of Columbia proper, there were 2 districts. And I always, another thing that was unique then, which is not true, hasn't been true for a long time, we had to go to the District Board of Review, which is located at 34th and Lowell Street. It's still a church that has accommodations for scouts. And so we had to go there for every merit badge. Well, I had 44 badges when I had got Eagle. I think I got 3 more before I got through. And so, being a kid, I had the manual, and going to this board review almost every month for almost 3 years by that time. I spoke to the young district executive, Paul Rosenberg was his name. And of course, he knew me, obviously, having seen me every month. And I showed him the manual, and he didn't send me to the scout executive. If I had gone to the scout executive at that time, we'd never be having this conversation. But he suggested I contact Joseph E. Keller. He was a Catholic and had his own law firm, Keller and Heckman Law Firm. He must have been about 6'5" or so. He didn't have a troop, and he was a bachelor, and he was on the council executive board. And so he put me on the agenda of the council executive board, and I made a presentation based on the booklet that I told you that I'd been sent, explained what was necessary, and he made the motion to sponsor the chapter. So it never, at that stage of things, it never went to the scout executive for the council. And I know we had to do some projects before we were actually installed. I'm trying to think now who the installing officer was. There was quite a synergy there. The Knights of Dunamis was started in this country by California. They sent, I may be confusing this now for a moment, and I apologize, with Alpha Phi Omega. I don't think we had anybody come from somewhere. We did with Alpha Phi Omega, which followed the year afterwards.
Okay.
So I apologize for getting that confused.
No problem.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Please continue.
Well, I'm trying to think what some of the projects we did with Knights of Dunamis at that point. I know we did do service projects. That's what it was. I know that Monsignor Brady. Do you know Monsignor Brady?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, you know, he was at Georgetown University. He wasn't at Catholic University. But
Yes.
we were patrol leaders together in the troop when I first started in scouting over at St. Anne's Church. And the charter membership of the Knights of Dunamis here, the President's Chapter, we took the name of the President's Chapter. I remember that. And there were only about 14 in it. And several of them are still alive and quite active. As you know, Monsignor Brady is very much active, even though he's 15 months younger than I am, but physically he's had far more challenges than I have. I'm trying to think of some of the things that we did. I know that we weren't all Catholics. I think several of us were, but not all of them. So that was the scout retreats. Probably started the next year when we got involved with Alpha Phi Omega in almost a parallel arrangement. And I think I had spoken to you about that before. That's where the ring came in, and when I was wearing when I got Eagle, Mr. Tucker had given me the ring, and I was wearing it in Latin class, and the boy next to me happened to be an Eagle Scout. And the opposite of me, I knew nobody at Catholic University, really. I went there for classes and was scouting on the weekend. But Frank saw it, and he said to me, isn't there some sort of an organization for scouts at the college level? And of course, I had the 2-volume edition of the Scoutmaster's Handbook, and they had Alpha Phi Omega in it. So we repeated the same thing. I wrote up to Park Avenue, and that was in October of 1940. I got my Eagle in 46. So I think this was in October of 47. And when I rode up to 2 Park Avenue, within a week, they had put me in touch with the state chairman. In those days, Alpha Phi Omega. Today they have regions and a little bit different setup, but there was only one other chapter in the Washington, D.C. area. It was at the University of Maryland. And so Professor Brigham at American University, which you know is only about a mile and a half from me, I got in touch with him. They gave me the contact information. And the day after Thanksgiving, because American U, it's almost a universal holiday, the 4-day weekend for most colleges and universities, and that was true of American University, and I was at Catholic University, it was true there. So we met in my recreation room in the basement, myself and Frank Levine came over to my house. There used to be a bus running between Westmoreland Circle and Catholic University. It's a fairly short run. And we spent about 3 hours after that Friday afternoon learning about Alpha Phi Omega and from Professor Brigham. And we wanted to continue in the process. So it was only about a week or so before he had put me in touch with the national office of Alpha Phi Omega, which I think was still in Kansas City. I don't think it had moved out to Independence. H. Roe Bartle was a tremendous speaker, and mayor of Kansas City. As a matter of fact, his Eagle Scouts, I think he was also his scout executive before he was mayor, and his Eagle Scouts challenged him because they'd had some corruption in the Pendergrass machine, I think it was, and they challenged him to run for office, and he did get elected mayor, but he was the rest of his life, he was always in all of our annual meetings, the speaker. He was really a tremendous speaker. I actually have a tape recording of one of the speeches. Quite a remarkable voice and everything else. So at our annual meetings, as long as he lived, and when we had one of the Knights of Dunamis conventions, the Knights of Dunamis national organization met once a year, and they were always having started on the West Coast, they were always there until I think it was 1976. I didn't tell you that when we got involved in the Knights of Dunamis before World War II, they had quite a few chapters. I think they'd gotten up in the number 80 or so. So there, and of course, as I've already said, when the war came along, all the leadership went into service. There was one chapter left, and when we were, and we also got permission, the national office, and Arthur, what was the national executive at that time? Somebody, Arthur, somebody, it came to me and it's gone away again. We were given a year and a half, as I recall, to see what we could do in restoring it nationally. And so several of the boys, one of the people in the Knights of Dunamis, he was in California, Menlo Park, or near Palo Alto. He was going into professional scouting, but he didn't stay with that. And we had another fellow who was an Eagle Scout, and he was actually our first paid person in the National Office of the Boy Scouts when we got started. And we took a trip to a number of councils in the East that had chapters of the Knights of Dunamis.
Mhm.
And I think it was chapter 2 that and his name slips me for the moment. He didn't have a negative experience with the Knights of Dunamis, but he was just about ready in a month or two to retire, so he wasn't about to get involved again. But his experience was all right, and we actually met him. And his chapter died out when the membership went into service during World War II. So that was kind of an interesting thing to meet with him. We also had the good favor, our council here in Washington, D.C., several of our executives went from here. It seemed to be a stepping stone to the National Office of the Boy Scouts. And one of those people was Howard Patton. He actually was related to the Patton, famous one in World War II. He'd gone into professional scouting, however, as a young man. And I think seems to me he had gone up to the regional level. We were in the regional office at that time, was up in Philadelphia. So he was very helpful to us in making contacts. And then we also had Skipper Wilson. Skipper was his nickname. Trying to think what his real first name was, but he was well known, and he became Scout executive here. And then he was promoted to the National Office of the Boy Scouts. And during the time that was it Arthur Fretwell? Was that one of the Chief Scout executives? Do you recall?
Not certain.
You're not certain? Okay, I think it was. Anyway, he'd gone up to the national office from Washington, D.C., and they did it. Dave Arsenault was one of the Eagle Scouts here. I'd known him. He'd been on the camp staff for quite 7 or 8 or 9 years. They actually paid him to do a survey of all of the councils that had the Knights of Dunamis chapters, and I think it was very favorable toward us, more than it would have been if there was somebody else involved in it, to tell you the truth, in terms of the report of what the councils that had chapters, how they felt about it. But anyway, that's how we got started, and we were chartered in, within a year here. Can you help me along a little bit with where we want to go from here?
Sure. So, maybe another topic we might want to talk about, John, is your involvement in Catholic Scouting here in the council. Is there anything you'd like to talk about?
Well, Joe Keller, I already told you he was a Catholic, and he was, the priest that was, the Catholic Church, generally speaking, was a little slow to get interested in scouting, but Father Fuller was a Jesuit who's located down in the Jesuit church down there on North Capitol Street. And unlike lots of others, he'd been involved in scouting for some time. He was a great exponent of scouting. And I know Joe Keller became chairman of the Catholic Committee on Scouting, and I actually was secretary for a couple of years at that time when Joe was the chairman. They really had, I guess they really hadn't had a very active Catholic committee prior to that. Father Fuller was the chief honcho, had been for a number of years. I think he'd been involved for 10 or 15, 20 years. I'm not sure how he got involved as a young priest, because he was about 90 years old when we died, and we had quite a bit of contact with Father Fuller. getting back on track. So when we got the chapter getting, I'll get back to the Zeta Mu chapter at Catholic University. When I wrote to 2 Park Avenue for Alpha Omega, as I've already told you, they put me in touch with the APO national office, but also the person that was the scouting advisor. Alpha Omega had been started at Lafayette College in 1925, and the person who was the scouting advisor there became at the time that we were doing what we were doing here in Washington, he was in the head of the relationships division of the Boy Scouts of America up in New York. And so when it came time for our installation, he was the installing officer. He'd been the scouting advisor to the Alpha chapter back in 1925, but he was the official installing officer on May 30th, 1948. And that was, I only met Frank in October of 47, so the chapters today don't get started that quickly.
Right.
And knowing that we were at Catholic University, the relationships division suggested that I go see Father Robert Brown. Father Brown I thought I had mentioned this to you before.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have.
Oh, okay, yes. He had been the first Catholic chaplain for this previous summer, I think, at Philmont, and he was the job that he had with I told you, I think I told you the other day what his name was. He'd been one of the founding officers in 1910 on the National Conference of Catholic Charities. I don't know that he would have normally been the easiest person to work with, because I think he had somebody for a short time before Father Brown got there. But Father Brown had the right personality for anything. And there are several priests that came from this. I don't think I got into this the other day. Among our charter members was, we had, first of all, we'd been told that they didn't think we'd get that many when we went to see the Dean of Men. Frank, I think I told you this already.
Yes.
Frank Levine knew everybody because he had was working his way through college and waiting on tables at Caldwell Hall, where all the priests and brothers were in those days. And I remember when we went to see Father Walsh, who was the Dean of Men, and Frank, of course, knew him, and Father Walsh was rather discouraged. He said he didn't. I think I told you this.
Yes, you did.
I'm sorry. I'm repeating then.
Okay.
But I should keep going because other things happened. One
Yes,
of the
please.
things Father Brown suggested that we, as a service project, we have a scout retreat. That was held at Camp Roosevelt. It was quite different than the retreats that they've had in more recent years in the council, which have gotten to be almost like camporees with scout camping. And Father Brown wanted to deal with the high school age group, and we actually had Camp Roosevelt had a central dining room, and we did all of the cooking. They went down Friday night. I think I told you some of this because I told you about the body that was washed up on the shore when the kids went. Some of the kids early in the morning went down to look for shark's teeth, and that was quite. I remember saying that to you. I'm sorry to repeat so much.
No problem.
But we had them housed. I'm trying to think of the time. It wasn't. We actually slept in the dining hall. They converted it in the wintertime used some of it for storage and so forth, because I think normally in the summer it would hold a couple hundred boys for meals inside. But about half of it was fixed up with, I think, double-deck cots, and the other half had tables and things for meetings and food. So our fraternity actually did the cooking, and they had the full retreat for both Saturday and Sunday. The number of boys that time was, the first time, was relatively small. They were brought to camp by their parents by car and picked up on Sunday afternoon. We had actually gone to a couple of the troops beforehand to advertise the retreat, or to recruit, you know, to get them interested. And most of them came from the city. There were two districts in Washington, D.C., the Northern District and the James E. West District. So most of them came from there rather than more distance. Of course, in more recent years, they've had council-wide, much wider and many more people. And the retreats were really quite, this was not a camping retreat. It was a real retreat for, like you'd have for high school kids. So we did, I'm trying to think some of the other things that we did, that we started, but the retreat did get things started. And we were credited for a number of years afterwards when the council Catholic committee got larger and converted into, handled it differently. They did call on Alpha Phi Omega for the first couple of years, and the chapter over at Catholic University, and we had quite a large attendance. And they, of course, credited us with getting the thing started. Mm-hmm. They haven't been using us now, and I think, well, of course, this year, I don't know how many years it is since they've had the retreats. They were regular every year, but they got to be, you know, 300 kids or a large number of kids attending. It was quite different than the retreats that Father Brown conducted. Where do we go from there?
Well, what else did you do in your involvement with the Catholic committee here in scouting in the council over the years? What were some of the other things that you were involved doing with the Catholic committee here, other than the retreats? Were you involved in the Ad Alitae Day or the Pope Pius, or were you involved in some of the other things here? And also, what was your relationship to the National Catholic Committee on Scouting?
Well, at that time, I don't think there was any with the National Catholic Committee on Scouting.
Okay.
I can't remember what they were doing if we're going back that far.
And that's fine. What was your relationship eventually with the National Catholic Committee on Scouting? Did you have a relationship with the National Catholic Committee on Scouting?
Well, I've paid my dues. Father Brady, though, that's the thing. You see, Father Brady, he was in the Knights of Dunamis, and we used to have the semester, between semesters, we had a camping trip. We used to take a camping trip because the semesters ended in January in those days, the mid-year, and that's how Father Brady I mean, that's how John Brady met Father Brown, because mm-hmm. Father Brown, we had the Knights of Dunamis and the Alpha Phi Omega group together. There were only 14 in the Knights of Dunamis, and John was an Eagle Scout, and he was in the Knights of Dunamis. So that went on for a couple of years. Father Brown got to know him. And I know that John was a year behind me at Georgetown, and he was in the reserves. He was expecting to, we used to, both he and I used to go down to the National Guard Armory because I was in the 163rd Military Police. At the time of the, I guess it was the Vietnam War, I and lots of people at Catholic University, we joined, and I joined the 163rd Military Police, but John we drilled the same night, so we often went down to the armory together and came back together. I know a couple of times we when Congress was in session, and as you know, when they're in session at night, the light is up on the dome. And I can remember several times we stopped in to observe. You didn't have to all get all the passes and things that you do today, and they were occasionally in session at night. So we, on our way home, we had done that a couple of times. I do recall that.
Okay. Do you did you participate in any national jamborees?
Oh yes.
So what was the earliest national jamboree that you participated in?
I participated in the one in 1950 because we had the Knights of Dunamis. The Knights of Dunamis had a national meeting every year. Just Alpha Phi Omega has one every other year, a national meeting. Typically, this time the virus thing has interfered with that, but generally speaking, I guess I went to all of the national meetings of Alpha Phi Omega once I got into it. Don't think I missed any.
And do you remember what was the last national meeting you went to for the Knights?
With the Knights of Dunamis? Well, I know that we had, I already have mentioned that there was a couple of years there when they recognized the Knights to see what we could do in terms of expanding. And I think that's when we were at, the Knights of Dunamis had a service. All three groups, the Order of the Arrow had a service corps troop at the Jamboree, and the Order of the Arrow and Knights of Dunamis did. And ours was, I think ours was the only complete troop of 40. And I know that the fellow who had been involved in San Francisco, he had actually, I'm getting things mixed up there. When we had the Knights of Dunamis, the first time they ever had a meeting in the East was at that Jamboree when we had the service corps at Valley Forge. And I know that the Long Beach chapter was quite active, and we had and I organized this too prior to the meeting, because they had 25 or more than 25 people. And Dr. Pierce, Ed Pierce, was head of the chapter in Vallejo, California. And I remember, I think in order to get their group rate for transportation, they had to have 25 people. I think they probably flew east. And I know that he funded, I think, three additional to make the 25. So we had about 25 flying east, and then the Long Beach chapter, they came by bus, not their own bus for the unit. So there were a group of them, and I had arranged for a week's trip. We went down, well, first of all, we went to the national office of the Boy Scouts up in New York at that time, and in New Jersey, I should say. And we also, I can remember staying at I guess it was the YMCA. I'd made arrangements for that. We had about an 8 or 9 day trip, which went up to New England, Boston, and it was more than the bus. I think the Greyhound bus that we used was about 42 passengers, something like that. And the fellow who was had driven his unit from Long Beach, and I guess they had 7 or 8 or 9 more. So we had about 50 people on that tour for 8 or 9 days. I know we went to all the main sites in the Boston area. Um, and we took an extra trip for some, as I recall, a couple of days, and then we went down as far as what's down here. What are the sites I'm thinking? Williamsburg thing.
In Boston?
Pardon me?
In Boston?
No. Well, we did the Boston, yes, but then we had a couple of days down at Williamsburg.
Well, you would have gone to Colonial Williamsburg. You would have toured the buildings. Yes. Maybe you went to Yorktown.
That we did that. There was a couple of days that we did for that. So it was about 10-day tour in addition to the Jamboree.
Okay. Of the Jamborees that you attended, of all the Jamborees you attended, which one did you think was the most fun? The one that you said, wow, this is the best one ever?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm pretty wound up with Jamborees. The World Jamboree, the best one I've ever been to, was the one in Sweden, without doubt. Absolutely.
And why was that?
Well, John Brady and I had both, he of course was a priest at this time, we had all both tried, and they had a preliminary, the prior Jamboree was the 100th anniversary of Scouting. It was in England. And the people that were going to go from the United States, we had preliminary preparation for it. And both John and I participated in that, but we weren't chosen. And I think it was probably, it's too bad. I think it was age, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
So the next Jamboree, of course, was the one in Sweden, the World Jamboree. And I applied for that at the last minute. And I'm sorry that John didn't, because he would have liked that. But I think we both had concluded that it was age, but it was very, very different attitude in Sweden. And I think I told you, because it's for some reason I recall this the last couple of days when I spoke to one of the Catholic chaplains, and asked did he know Father Brady. He said, well, who doesn't know Father Brady? This was a Catholic priest from the United States who was one of the, because they usually have quite a few priests. The World Jamborees are pretty large, and they may have 20 different chaplains around. The attendance is, I guess we had about 40,000 people there. But the amazing thing was that they had exhibits, probably 25 or 30 of the religious groups, the Mormons, the Catholics, the Protestants, and so on and so forth. And it wasn't a proselytizing thing, but there was a whole village area devoted to that, where people could go and learn something about the differences. And I think that was a very good thing. I didn't feel that it was an educational thing. And the attitude over there is quite different. I would be a little hesitant if I had a very young boy, a young 14-year-old. There's usually a minimum age, and most of the countries, there are only a very few that have Boy Scouts separate, and I would say that the average participants are more at the college age at the Swedish Jamboree. So that if you had a mature fellow, it's okay. But I think a lot of the young ones, they were more toward the older high school and college age activities. Lots of different eating venues reflecting the the culture of the eating different types of food that you get in different places, and also there were bicycles all over, and I didn't see any accidents. At the national jamborees that I've attended, unless you were, on staff that had to have a bicycle to get somewhere for a certain purpose, there were lots of people with bicycles at the World Jamboree, and they seemed to be able to handle it. I didn't see any accidents. And it was a more mature attitude.
Mhm.
It's hard to express the thing, but I was very impressed with the World Jamboree there.
What was the last, do you remember what was the last U.S. national, the national jamboree? What was the last national jamboree you attended?
The last one we had here, we have a permanent site there in West Virginia.
Yeah, yes, I was there in 20, what was it, 2013, I think it was, when they opened the first one. Or was
Yes.
it, yeah, I was there in 2013. Were you there in 2013?
Yes.
And what did you do there at 2013? Were you just there? Were you working with the Catholic Committee? Were you doing something at the,
No,
at the
I've
council
usually been
level?
in Alpha Phi Omega Service Corps,
Okay. Okay.
and then last time I was, our scout leader was from British Columbia, a lady. I talked to her about a week ago or 2 weeks ago.
I know it in 2013, I remember stopping by the Alpha Phi Omega booth at the Jamboree. They sold me some patches. I remember I think the guy wanted to get rid of the patches, so he sold me some, even though he said it's really for Alpha Phi members. But I bought a couple. I don't know, whatever set they had, or two sets that they had there.
Yeah, they're very patch oriented. I'm not that way.
Mm-hmm.
I did the first jamboree I went to. The patches that I was interested in are the things that I had participated in. I think our own council may have had one, but I wasn't. I'm not normally a great patch collector.
And in 2010, which was the last one at AP Hill, were you at the 2010 one at AP Hill?
I think I've been at all of them.
Okay. And always working with Alpha Phi Omega?
No, the last time, as I told you, I was with the. We had this right near. Were you at the last one?
No, I was not.
Oh, because I was with the. We were in the headquarters troop that was closest to the big tent. Most of the staff, and that's something that I like. That's something that I first experienced in Sweden. Most of the staff ate in a very large tent, and I was in the service corps in Sweden, and we we had a team of scouters. The little lady from Bangladesh, they did let her go inside because I guess I was 80 at the time. There was one other gentleman who was close to me in age. I think he was a colonel. But our job was unloading. As I say, they served. Almost all of the staff came to the central tent. That was not true of the earlier jamborees in this country.
Right.
You didn't get to see your friend that was 2 miles away in another unit without devoting your free day to get over there. But that was different, and that was the way it was in Sweden. And I think that influenced what we had here which they followed the same pattern. And as I recall, I'm trying to think of his name now because I think he was an Alpha Phi Omega person who headed that up, and I think he did an excellent job, and he did it again here at our national jamboree. And well, there's something else I told. I didn't tell you. We have a number of priests have come through Alpha Phi Omega. Back at Catholic University, Dick Telnack was, and this is the influence of Father Brown that I've told you about. He had tremendous influence. He suggested they were just starting the Monastery of the Holy Spirit down in Conyers, Georgia, outside of. Did I talk to you about that before?
Yeah, yes, you did.
Oh, okay. Well, and I told you, Dick Telnack. Yes, I have a picture of him when we had the retreat at Camp Roosevelt. So we didn't have to rent the camp. We did a work project and we tore down the old nature lodge, and I have a picture of Dick Telnack doing that. He was. And anyway, 3 of the boys went down for a retreat, but Dick stayed, and he's been a priest ever since. And I've ordered things at Christmas time for several people down there, and I checked. He's still active. He does makes the stained glass windows. Or he has the monks that he's trained them. I think I told you all about that. But
Yeah, yes, you did.
He probably would. If it hadn't happened that way, he might never have been a priest. But that was influence of Father Brown. We have another member of was active with us, Dave Arsenault, and he's a priest. I don't know that all came just from Father Brown, because he was active on this camp staff and our council for about 10 years. And then he went into the priesthood. And I saw him at one of the reunions about a year ago. He came down. He's actually retired now.
Do you remember what order he's in, or?
I think he was diocesan.
Okay. Okay. Anything else that you'd like to share about Alpha Phi Omega or the Knights?
Well, I think they've had quite an influence. There must have been about 10 years in the summer. The members of the Knights of Dunamis and until we had the national conference at Valley Forge, the conferences were always out on the West Coast, and they had one every year. And of course, each chapter had delegates to the conference. So there were probably 6, 7, 8 years, and I always made a long trip of it. That I took the leadership out there. We went. Well, Bob Moore in 1954. I heard from him. I had a Christmas card from him. I've talked to him. We've known each other ever since. He and I took a trip together with Louis Avalier, who was, I think I told you this one too already.
Yeah. Was this the one to Philmont?
Well, Bob and I went to Philmont, and we picked Louis up because Louis, at Albuquerque, after his train, he was in the National, I don't know whether he was National Guard or Army Reserve. He had his summer trip, fortunately, his summer camp, military camp, it was out near Albuquerque. So Bob and I went from Philmont to pick him up, which isn't very far away.
Okay.
And then we went west, and I know we met George Wyman. George Wyman, he's still alive, and we've been good friends. When I took my mother and stepfather to Hawaii in 1975, he was stationed there. He was I think he worked for the Navy in different places, but by that time he and his wife, and he had a daughter and son. I think the daughter passed on, but they met us. Honolulu is, when you're on a cruise ship, that generally speaking, I've been all around South America, and your cruise ships don't go into the main part of the city, but the one in Honolulu, it's pretty nice. You can walk from the ship about 10 blocks and you're in a nice shopping area and all of that. And I remember when I went over with, my stepfather was blind, by the way, and George had arranged to take us out to the pineapple place. I know that Clarence was able to pick a pineapple out in the field, and he'd arranged for us to have dinner at the cultural center in Honolulu. So, and then I forget what he did for my mother and what they did during the day, because I know that George and I went snorkeling in Hanauma Bay. Their home at that time was a suburb of Honolulu. So they really were very gracious and had lays for us, met us at the ship. We all each had a lei, the flower ring that you put around your neck.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
So we've been good friends ever since, and I've talked to him very recently.
Any, just to change the subject a little bit, any other memory of scouting that sticks out to you, not necessarily related to Alpha Phi Omega or the Knights, but any other, maybe a particular camping trip or a relationship with one of the other scouts or something, scout leaders, anything that stands out that you may not have kind of mentioned to me or talked to me about?
Well, I'm sure they are, because so many of them. I mean, here just before I went to Rhode Island last summer, when we were organizing, I've been very involved and very disappointed at the American Youth Hostels. That when I took the 4 boys over to Europe for the whole summer, 1965, we used youth hostels quite a bit, and I was impressed with them, because I think that they inexpensive lodging and the opportunity to travel for like the farm kid out in Iowa. He doesn't. The average kid in a farm in the rural areas of this country, they don't have an opportunity to travel that's inexpensive that way. And I thought that was so very important. And I'm very upset with the way that it's gone in this country. And they're now HIUSA. They're not the same organization. They give scholarships, but the scholarships go to most of the, in their scholarship program, they're people who have already gone to college. And that's, I'm feeling very strongly about that. Russ Hedges, he started in our chapter, and he means well. He's very personable, but I remember that I was active from the very beginning with him, and then there was a time when when he got in charge, that there were intervals in between times when they had somebody else, and it was quite different. But I rescued them a couple of times. They were going to discontinue the trips program and they discontinued the news thing. And then there was, when he went to the national office, has been the CEO now for about 20 years, I guess. But for the first couple of years, he wasn't CEO, and we had somebody else here, and I got re-involved. And when I found out, because they had regional meetings every year, and I used to go to them before that, I remember, and of course, my background is in the Boy Scouts, and we all volunteer.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't want to get too much in the hostile thing because that really isn't, I think, what we're as much interested about.
Well, it certainly was interesting to me because I think it could have been done a great deal for American education, and they should have. People will donate money for educational purposes, but that's not the way they've gone. And so they've dissolved the council. I was on the council here at the time of 9/11, and this has been a major thing in my life. At the time of 9/11, we still had followed the Boy Scout pattern. They were started, I think I may have mentioned before, by Isabel Monroe Smith, who had been involved in scouting. I think Monroe may have been a professional scouter. They were on the first trip with 1934 to Europe. I wish I could remember the Eagle Scout who was in charge of their programs, and he was the speaker at the 75th anniversary. In the 90s, he's passed on, but he was a wonderful trip leader and a wonderful storyteller, and he was an Eagle Scout before he got involved. So the scouting influence was very strong at that time, and that's all been pretty much lost more recently on that, which is too bad.
Do you remember ever meeting Baden Powell or Ian or Goodman or any of the legends in scouting?
Lady Baden Powell she came. We were. That was out in. I definitely. My senior patrol leader was her escort the last time she was in this country for one of our national jamborees, and I was on staff there. As I say, my senior patrol leader was her escort for the day, and that was at Farragut Park in Idaho. There were one of the jamborees, as you may remember, they had a Jamboree East and a Jamboree West, and Jim Cochran, my executor, and of course Jim I've known since when I was working in California, and he was 16 at the time, and I was working for 3 months in Stockton State Hospital, and on my weekends, I think all but one weekend, I was either going south, and I mentioned George Wyman already. At that time, he was living in Pomona. I think he'd been in service and was in his last year of college. And I remember the semester break, we spent 5 days on a camping trip in Death Valley. And his home was in Pomona, and I visited him there. And we've been good friends right along, but I first met him in '54 when I was traveling with Bob. At that time, we stopped to see him. He was on the summer staff in one of the High Sierra camps. So, yeah, we've had quite an influence on each other, I guess.
And anyone else that was well known in scouting, one of the founders of scouting, or like, did you ever meet Bill Hillcourt or anyone like him?
Well, I saw him. I think John Brady had more contact with him than I did, but I was certainly at places when he was around.
Okay.
Because I was on most of the time. I was on service corps, so we're active in headquarters. Though the first time I was on, we did a lot of guard work. That was the one in Valley Forge, because there were places where the scouts could. We actually were camped on the battlefield, and so there were some places where you had to make sure kids didn't get off where they shouldn't get off.
Right.
Get in difficulty, because that's pretty well developed by that time. You didn't have the permanent camp structures.
Right, like today.
No, yeah, definitely not. And one day, everybody got to go into Philadelphia Independence Hall by train from Valley Forge. So, the Jamboree lasted about a week, so I think everybody had a chance to go one day with different troops and so forth.
That's
So
nice.
we did that, yes. No, they were memorable events.
Okay. Okay, very good. Anything else you might like to share? Any other thoughts?
Well, in all those summers, probably 10 or 12 times, I'm in touch with a lot of the boys. And then Henry Wixon was just as I started to tell you, we at 9/11 they at that time the hosteling was still uh, separate councils and so forth, and they came to our council. I was on the board for many years here in National, Potomac Area Council of American Youth Hostels, and they came to us because they were in danger of going bankrupt. And so we had I think a third interest in the DC hostel, which was the largest one that we had. And we helped them out. And a couple of years later, they had annual conventions. And again, they persuaded largely Russ Hedge and those about him that they could better, their rationale was that they wanted to unify all of the councils, which meant to dissolve all of the councils, that they could better leverage their assets. And I think they had 4 regions, similar to scouting, but not the same. But they had councils, not as many. They had about 28 councils, I think. And most of the hosteling councils were bicycle clubs and the rest of the thing. But the Northeast region, Boston was very active, and most of the councils in our region had paid executive directors. Randy Madras, that you may know, he's one of the Eagle Scouts. He and I drove to Alaska in 1962. That was quite a trip. I was planning to go for the summer. Did 14,000 miles. I budgeted for $300. He just felt he couldn't afford it. So he paid me $150. We did 14,000 miles. We were in, that was the 100th anniversary of Henry Ford's birth. And we were at Ford's place in Detroit. For the time of, the Canadians and the Americans celebrate their Confederation Day and our July 4th with joint fireworks and so forth. And we were there for that weekend. I know that. And of course, we went out to what's Ford's place called? There's a whole village. Have you not been to that?
No, I have not.
Oh, you haven't seen a lot of things in the country yet. You got something to look forward to. Anyway, that was part of the thing. And then we, later on the way back, we attended the World's Fair, which was in Seattle. And I know that, and I had a student that I'd had at Western Junior High School, and Randy, the 3 of us, we had a luggage rack on the top in a Fiat. My mother and I had traveled in Europe this summer before and brought the Fiat back. We bought, in those days, Americans very often bought a car over there and then brought it back on the ship. So you have 3 people with camping gear for, I think we did 14,000 miles. It was quite an adventure. Anyway, Randy's active with me now. And Henry Wixon is another one of my Eagle Scouts. And what we have done, now that they've dissolved all the councils, we have reincorporated. We did this, met in my backyard this summer before I went to Rhode Island this past summer. and Randy was here, Henry Wixon was here, and there's several other people. We had 7 of us, and we have essentially reincorporated. We delivered 4 hostels debt-free to the national office, and they, of course, now that they've had this pandemic, they mortgaged them all, and now they've closed most of them. I guess it was last night, one of the last 2 days, I was on a webinar listening to, hearing about it and hearing about the hostels in other countries in Canada and so on and so forth. I'm glad I was able to do that. That's thankful for a very controversial person, Steve Bloomfield. I have a number of Steves. They're all quite unique. So I'm pretty involved in things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Any other further thoughts about scouting? The recent changes over the last couple of years that you want to share, or maybe you don't want to share your thoughts on a lot of the changes that have occurred over the last 7-8 years in scouting.
Well, if I had to, and I don't mind, I've told a number of people this. If I had to choose, scouting has been more important to me than my college degree at Catholic University or my degree at George Washington University. The one that I feel differently about is the professional degree in the social work. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been of more value to me in the last 4 or 5 years because I don't know, maybe I'm repeating myself to you, but in social work, you're trying to put yourself in the place of the client, and that's what most people don't do. Mm-hmm. Most people give you something that they think they give you something that they like. It's not necessarily something that fits your situation. And I've had some pretty extreme experiences with that, and recently, what people want to do for you. It's mm-hmm. nice to do for it, but you should understand the person and where they come from.
Right.
So,
okay. I'm not sure what else to ask you. I think, John, maybe we'll do one more. If you have any thoughts about anything else, we could maybe potentially do one more. Anything else in the future that you want to share with about scouting, any particular memories in the future, not tonight. And, any other particular event that sticks out in your mind?
When I was taking a trip, the Knights of Dunamis had their meetings every year. There was one time when they had it in the Christmas time, and Randy Madras, he used to do things very, very frugally, and he went out, I don't know, he got a car for nothing or something, practically nothing. Randy was very good at that. He has matured more than any friend that I've had, I think. Tremendously so. Mm-hmm. He was 19 when I drove him to Alaska. His mother is still alive. She was quite young when she had him. She's about 98 or 99 years old.
Okay.
I think. But Randy's quite remarkable. Well, most of my friends have been remarkable. I'm in touch with a lot of them. That keeps me busy. I wish that I can't be on the phone all of the time. But
Sure.
I hear from a great many of them.
Okay. Well, then I think if maybe I'll touch base one more time with you next week, and maybe there's some other memories that come to mind. We may want to do a future recording. If not, I'll hold on to these, you know, and share them with anyone who may be interested. I can hold on to them and, you know, not release them for a while. I can release them and just put them out there. And if people want, they can, you know,
Well,
access
I
them.
think there are a lot of people that don't know much about the Knights of Dunamis, and they don't know much about how the National Eagle Scout Association was established, and that
Well, maybe next
we
time, John, we
were
could talk about
first
how
club in
NISA
that.
was established.
Well, if that hasn't come across to you, I guess we should. I should think about it.
Not NISA, yeah, we haven't talked about NISA. And maybe
Well,
that's
the
a good
National
time.
Eagle Scout Association today doesn't seem to be. They don't recognize where they came from, and they're not doing the same things. They're totally different. I mean, it's an adult organization, and we were a service organization. I can remember, I guess it was the time of Nixon. Of course, today you can't have scouts be the main guard in front of the president's stand, but that was the sort of thing that we did in the early days. And in the couple of years, during the couple of years that the Boy Scouts of America recognized the Knights of Dunamis, and with the idea that maybe permanently incorporating them. I can't think of his name. There was one of the professionals here was our advisor, and then he was later moved up into Pennsylvania, and he had us come up there. We established several other chapters, and our chapter was usually the one that went to initiate the chapters in other locations. So we had several on the East Coast. And Joe Keller was, I remember he drove us up. There was one up in New Jersey. He was quite a fellow. He took a couple of us up there, and he was going to have, he invited us to dinner, and he must have invited it. I thought it was a personal dinner, and he had everybody that was invited, and it was quite a number of people. Westchester used to have, he used to have an apartment at the Westchester, and they had a nice dining room in those days. And anyway, everybody that went there thought they were going to have dinner with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, there were probably 20 or 25 people at the party. And he didn't let on all day. We were driving back in order to be here for it. So that was Joe. And he was a great person. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, John. I'll give you a call, and maybe if you think that you have some other memories that you want to share, you know, we could set up another one of these. If not, then this has been great. But the other thing, I'm going to stop recording now. Let me just stop recording for a minute.